All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Prue. I'm from the Alumni Relations Office here at UConn. I'm thrilled to be with you today, as well as to welcome in an incredible panel who are here to talk about resiliency and how you can forge your own way to success and moving in a positive direction in whatever scenario you might find yourself in. We are joined by experts ranging across the industries from academia, frontline medical, professional services, and tech, and beyond. And I'm as well always thrilled and excited to be joined by my teammates who have helped to bring these programs to you throughout the course of the year. Kate Krause, Samantha Morris-Avery, and Kristen Luger. And as you all know, we're go-tos when it comes to these virtual programs, and a huge shout out to them for all the efforts and work that they do as well. And before we get started today, to those of you who have joined us, whether that was from a previous career hack that we put together or was from our month of career and professional development in February, welcome back. And if you missed one of those programs, you can definitely log in to see those. They were all recorded from our month of career and professional development by going to youtube.com/UConnAlumni. And back to today. First, I want to make sure that everybody knows we do have closed captioning available. So should you wish to utilize this service, please visit your toolbar on your Zoom access, and you'll see that Kristen's dropping it in there now in the chat. You can select the CC option and then activate your subtitles. My colleagues will be monitoring the chat throughout the day, and if you have any technical challenges, they'll go ahead and try to help you as best as we can. If the chat is open, so you can also utilize that to engage with each other throughout the program today, discussions, let us know where you're logging in from. We do ask, however, that if you have questions, that you utilize the actual Q&A function that's listed right next to that section there, next to that chat button. Jump in there, drop your questions in there. That way we can keep those kind of in a streamlined, organized way so we don't miss anything, because the chat does tend to fill up from time to time. We ask that if you do use the chat, however, that you make sure that you are being thoughtful, kind, courteous, and supportive in your dialogue, and try to keep your conversations as topical as you can. We just want to make sure that this is a welcoming and engaging environment for everybody. Let's see. Today's session is being recorded. So if you have to jump off, grab a bite to eat, take a phone call, whatever it is, just know that we will post this up on that youtube.com/UConnAlumni page shortly. Once all the recording materials are together, we'll get that up there and we'll get that out to you so you can go ahead and follow up and share with all your friends. Back to today, let's introduce our moderator for the day. We are thrilled to have one of UConn's finest faculty members with us today. Dr. NORA MADJAR is an associate professor of management with the School of Business at UConn, and she received her PhD in business administration from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And she is also a Fulbright scholar in Bulgaria in 2011. Her main expertise is in creativity in the workplace, and her research examines the social and contextual factors that stimulate or hinder creative performance, and what also stimulates creativity in negotiations. Her scholarly work explores different ways to structure jobs to facilitate creative work and facilitate the creative process, and has multiple articles on creativity within the Journal of Applied Psychology, the Journal of Management, and Academy of Management Journal, as well as many others. And she also currently sits on the editorial board of the Journal of Organizational Behavior. She teaches courses at UConn in organizational behavior, managing creativity and innovation, and negotiation for both our undergrad and our MBA population. So, Professor, thank you so much for taking the reins today. We're thrilled to have you joining us, and I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Josh. And I'm very excited to be part of this panel and to lead this panel. Part of my research on creativity also looks at post-traumatic growth, when instead of people being blocked when they experience adversity and stress, they actually bounce back and grow, and their creativity grows. And I'll hope to contribute in this discussion with what we've learned with my research on creativity. But first, I'm very excited about our panel of alumni. And I'll start with YVONNE GOLNIK. YVONNE is an executive coach and associated with PwC. So YVONNE, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your experience makes you relevant and important for this panel?
Yes, thank you. So hello, everyone. As was mentioned, I'm an executive coach. I work with the partners at PwC, and in that work, we definitely cover a lot about resilience, and I'll get more into that when we, get into the discussion. But I have been a coach for a long time. Prior to joining PwC, I spent about 13 years in a human capital consulting firm. And then prior to that, I spent 15 years in industry. And so I think, just being able to bring a lot of that experience working with leaders, dealing with a lot of challenges is, something that I'm really passionate about.
Thank you, Yvonne. And next is Wendy GARVIN MAYO, a nurse practitioner and CEO associated with the Stress Blueprint. Wendy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Wendy GARVIN MAYO. I am a nurse practitioner and a clinical scientist, and I am the CEO of the Stress Blueprint, where we help people transform their lives through stress management. So resilience and stress management go hand in hand.
Thank you. And then BRITT Hunter is a business manager, Azure Core, associated with Microsoft. Welcome, BRITT. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. So my name is BRITT Hunter. I, as stated before, work at Microsoft currently. And I think my identity morphing, I guess, journey would allow me to say that I have resilience. I'm a former student athlete here at UConn, playing basketball, then turned coach, then turned teacher, turned dean, turned vice principal, then MBA student now at Microsoft. So I think that I have challenged myself enough to say that, I think I've earned my resilience badge.
Thank you. So very excited to have all of you, especially because you have different backgrounds, different experiences, and that's important to consider when we talk about resilience. So I want to address a question to the audience for just a reflection. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, but I want you to spend 10 seconds and reflect. Do you consider yourself resilient? Why do you consider yourself resilient if you do? And if for some reason you don't consider yourself resilient, why not? And connected with this, how do you usually overcome adversity? And what do you think is the role of resilience in helping people overcome difficult situations? I think at this point, it's also important, before we discuss examples on how to help you become and recognize more resilience, to define what is resilience. And usually resiliency is defined as a process of effectively coping with adversity. It is how people bounce back from difficulties, because life is complex. We've experienced a pandemic, and there is a war going on. There are lots of things that make life difficult and complex, but a lot of times we find an easy or not so easy, a tough way, but we find a way to cope and bounce back. So in positive psychology, resilience refers to exactly this ability to cope with whatever life throws at us. Some people are knocked down by challenges, but they return as a stronger person, that those challenges and difficulties actually prepare them for life later. And we call these people resilient, as their experience always sometimes leads to actually the so-called post-traumatic growth, and they are stronger and able to cope with even more challenges. So we recognize that in the last 2 years of the pandemic, we've experienced a lot of traumatic events, lots of stress. But let's discuss, and I'll turn the question to our panelists. Give us some examples and stories of resilience, and they could be stories from the past that vividly illustrate what is a resilient person, or current stories of everyday life that you've experienced during the pandemic. So anyone who wants to start?
I can start, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
So as you said, I mean, there are so many examples of people all around us who have adapted. And so that's the word that to me kind of begins to describe resilient people, is you have to adapt to, kind of what's happening in the moment. And so Yes, dealing with the pandemic, you know, you have parents that have had to teach at home and juggle work. And you mentioned Ukraine, people fighting, you know, for their country. And so all of that, I think we all have moments of, you know, being resilient. And like you said, we grow from it. Now, one extreme example that has stood out for me is with Viktor Frankl, who he, you know, was a Holocaust survivor. And he chronicled his experience in the book, Man's Search for Meaning. And, you know, he talked about the importance of not losing hope and having a strong sense of purpose as a foundation for just being resilient and being able to, you know, handle even those dire situations. So that's kind of one extreme example. But like I said, we do see it in just, you know, people all around us. And, you know, there are ways to just be more kind of mindful, and it is a mindset that helps people be more resilient.
Thank you, Yvonne. And Viktor Frankl is definitely a very vivid example illustrating the full scope of resilience that we could see. So BRITT and Wendy, do you want to add something from your experiences dealing with resilient people?
Yes,
Wendy?
so I would say healthcare workers, just being a nurse myself, you know, I work with a lot of healthcare professionals, but COVID-19 has disrupted, you know, their lives personally and professionally. And many healthcare workers are still showing up, which is definitely resilient. Not saying they're showing up fully, because there's a lot of things that come with that, whether it's stress, anxiety, depression, but there are a lot of healthcare workers who are still at the bedside, still caring for patients when the pandemic started and even today. So those individuals are, you know, my example of true resilience.
Thank you, Wendy. And we've all witnessed in one form or another the coping abilities and the adaptability of the healthcare workers and what they've been through the last 2 years. Thank you. Britt, do you have an example to add?
I do. And so I love that everyone provided examples of people and stories from external experiences. And I think when I was younger, I was often looking for those examples outside of myself. And I wasn't actually thinking about what are the things that I've actually experienced already that make me resilient. And so now that I'm 36 and I feel like I've had 4 different lives, I actually think back to when I was 18 and I was just transferring to UConn, and I actually did get hurt. I went from being the #1 player in the country in high school, highly touted, most sought after player, to blowing my knee out and being told, you know, you probably never play basketball again, so you need to figure it out now. And that was hard. You know, it took me 4 years to figure out, who am I now? And I think a lot of us have been through something like that, where we are shifting into something new, or we're taking a risk, or we're jumping into a brand new space. And it's hard. And I think sometimes we think we're supposed to just turn it off and turn it on. But like I said, it took me about 4 years to really figure out what my identity was going to be and how to be comfortable in my own skin and forge a brand new path. And to do that at such a young age, I mean, I'm blown away by it, because when I share my story with peers who also played sports, or peers who maybe never played sports, you know, their response is like, I don't know if I would have, you know, I don't know if I'd be where you are right now had that happened to me, had everything been taken away and you had to start from scratch. So I love external examples, but I think what helps me the most, especially when I'm going through a new challenge, is to look back and like pat myself on the back and say, man, you did something amazing at a very young age, and you proved to yourself that you are resilient. And so now you can face this too, because you've already done X. So love the external examples, but I would encourage everyone to look at something you've already done, and you'll see that you are also pretty resilient.
Thank you so much, Brett. It's important to hear all of these examples, and also to definitely look inside of you, because the inner strength is one of the characteristics we're looking for. Outside resources are important to build resilience as well, but we have to recognize the inner strength. And sometimes, I love the example of the healthcare workers and Viktor Frankl as a vivid example of resilience, but sometimes we're looking at them and we do not recognize, we do not associate ourselves with them. So it's very important to think of the little ways you have shown and demonstrated resilience. And there are different types of resilience. We could talk about physical resilience, we could talk about mental resilience, emotional resilience. And I'm sure that each one of the participants or our audience has exhibited some kind of resilience through the experience challenges in their lives. I also believe that it's important to talk about resilience exactly now. We talked a little bit about adaptation and how we have to adapt, and we were all forced to adapt to the change that the pandemic brought. But now that it has been 2 years of the pandemic and still lots of unknown, and still we anticipate a lot of more changes, I believe it's even more important to talk about resilience. And I wanted to turn it over to the panelists. Why do you think exactly now we're talking a lot about resilience? And why do we need to be more cognizant and build to recognize and build our resilience now?
I think it's important now because we have been disrupted, all of us, with this pandemic. And it makes me think of a quote from my grandfather. He told me when I first graduated from nursing school, you have to set your sail, whatever that means to you. But for me, it really means, what is your purpose? Where are you going? Where's your direction? When we're disrupted by something like a pandemic, we kind of lose focus of that. So I think it's important that we check in, and it makes me think of the introspection to see, where are you internally? How are you, your perspective of what's going on around you? And then what do you do with that? You reflect on it to really see, do you need to reset your sail? Do you need to realign? So it's really like a check-in with yourself. So that's why it's important right now at this very moment to check in and see, what's going on with me? Do I need to make a shift, or am I okay? You know, do I need to like reshift my sail, so to speak, on life?
Thank you, Wendy. And you mentioned something, resetting and having a purpose and kind of trying to reposition and remind yourself of the purpose that you have. And Yvonne mentioned the sense of purpose that Viktor Frankl had with his diaries. So that's very important. And sometimes we lose track of what's our purpose. Why do we matter when everything is going against us and new challenges are thrown at us? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So yeah. I think it's an interesting time also because there's so many things happening externally that have nothing to do with us. So many different things happening with other groups in other countries. And so I think there's a few ways to look at those challenges. And I think right now a lot of us have moved into a space of like, oh my gosh, like my empathy is at an all-time high. I'm like thinking about other people. But I like to look at this experience and the experiences of others and say, you know, let me think about my gratitudes and what I actually have going on and what I'm not going through, right? It's not to say that you're not going through anything, but when these things are happening to swaths of people and in such a public light, and they just, you know, they exist through it. Not even that they're changing or they're doing anything incredibly different, but they are just withstanding that experience. I think to myself, if they're withstanding this, you know, I can definitely withstand a lot more because it's also inspiring, right? It's tragic, a lot of the things, but when history books are written about this, they will definitely shed a light onto how inspiring those people are. And we don't need to wait 20 years for that. We can look at it now and say, wow, this is really tragic, but they are going to make it to tomorrow. They're going to make it to next week. And the things that they're building in this moment are something that I can learn from too. So I think it's an important lesson to be taken from all these things, because you can look at it so many different ways. But if you're not inspired by the resilience of others right now, you definitely should be.
And can I just add to what Britt just said? It made me really think of the power of the pause right now. So in order to look at or assess, you have to pause. And in our society, we're just going, right? So the pause, you have to intentionally pause to do that reflection. So I just wanted to say that the importance of the pause in really assessing what's going on and how you're interpreting or internalizing that.
Yeah, and just to build on that, what I see in the work with the partners is we tend to live in a world that kind of rewards, being tough and being busy and being strong. And the idea that we can just put our heads down, and muscle through it, it's just not sustainable. And I think, we've all been seeing the kind of consequences of that. There was this article that talked about this feeling of languishing that people have. And it's not quite, depression or burnout, but it is this, lack of joy. And so I think when we say why talk about resilience, it's because it's really affecting a lot of people in different ways that they might not think, wow, this rises to a level that I need to focus on it, but it's just, not sustainable. That endurance mindset, it kids you into thinking that, if I just get through busy season, or if I just, make that deadline, or if we just, wait for the pandemic to end, right? It's just not going to happen. So I think you've all talked about different ways of just having that mindset. But the first point, like you said, Wendy, that pause and being able to notice, like just stop for a moment to notice what's happening in your body, to recognize that you can't just keep going without making a change.
Thank you, Yvonne, especially about mentioning this wonderful article by Adam Grant in the New York Times about languishing, because sometimes we recognize when something is dire. When somebody is very sick, we go and seek treatment. And when we have a big challenge presented and we have to quickly solve the problem tomorrow, we gather all of our resources and we solve it. But we've been going through a pandemic, and sometimes we don't recognize how many changes and challenges we're dealing with at the same time, and they accumulate and the level of stress accumulates. And we cannot just keep going the same way we kept going, expect that it will continue forever and we'll be able to survive this way. So the pause is very important to reconsider our priorities, our values, and how we function, and also the ability to recognize that it may not seem, or you may be wondering, I survived the first couple of months that were so stressful. Why now I'm so stressed? Why now? But the uncertainty continues, the challenges and the changes, and every change requires adaptation, and we have to cope with that change. And we also miss certain things and continue to miss them. So there was a very early in the pandemic an article about how we're all experiencing grief and we don't recognize it, and that grief affects us and we don't stop. And it's grief about the things we miss, the things that are changing. And now that we adapted to more social distancing and working from home, we're expected to change almost overnight again or gradually, and we even don't know what the new reality of work will entail. So all of this requires even more resilience, because we thought we're strong, we thought we have resources, but most of them may be exhausted, and we have to gather some new ones to be able to adapt successfully. So that's a good leeway to my next question about resilient people. How do we recognize them? What are the characteristics of resilient people that you could come up with, or what determines how resilient we are? Because I think for people to recognize their own resilience, it's important to understand what makes a person resilient.
One thing that I've noticed about what makes people resilient, or the characteristics, is the curiosity, right? Is being okay with not knowing, what's going to happen, and just adapting. So you mentioned it, I think early on about the post-traumatic growth, did you say?
Yes.
And so that is true. It's that you're faced with something. And then if you're not willing to learn from your experience and let that experience change you, you know, in a way. So people that get very rigid and very, you know, they just keep doubling down on, you know, here's what I know, and they're not as resilient. You know, it's being that growth mindset is that, yeah, this didn't work. You know, what else can I try?
And I love this because the growth mindset talks about learning, not so much about being tough. Yes, we have to cope and we have to exhibit some kind of toughness, but it's very misleading to just think about, I just have to toughen up, because that's not a way to cope, especially through a longer period of time.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, and it made me laugh about something that I had to recognize in myself when I was going through another change. So you know, like I said before, I think I had been tapping into, okay, I've done this, I've done that. I can definitely handle that, this new thing that's coming on. And what I didn't consider was that as I get older and as I change, my resilience also changes. And I don't respond the same way. So I wasn't always open to the way that I was responding to stressors. I mean, very simple example. I remember leaving New York City, preparing to go to get my MBA, moving to Nashville. And to me, it was like, okay, another adventure. In my mind, that's how I felt. But then I had this just crazy, just ridiculous acne breakout. My scalp was dry, flaking. I was getting psoriasis all over my body. And I was like, what's going on? And my doctor was like, this is stress. You know, stress is coming out of your body in a different way. And I was not having it. You know, I was like, no, I'm not stressed at all. I'm not stressed. I'm excited. And, you know, I didn't take a moment. I didn't pause. I didn't slow down. I didn't check in. I didn't get a therapist until I got to business school. And then it started to, you know, become unwieldy in other ways, right? Now I'm not sleeping right. And then it was like, okay, maybe I am stressed. Maybe I'm not handling this as well as I thought maybe I should have been, because I've already done something similar. And so I like what YVONNE says, because I was not open to being in a stressed out situation. I was like, no, this isn't a thing. And I made it worse. And so I've learned now to start listening to my body and listening to sleep patterns, eating habits, everything, and getting really in tune with how am I responding, and if I'm not doing well, then maybe I should change, you know, some other things.
Well, and
Yeah.
Britt,
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Wendy.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I think the characteristics of someone, you know, who is resilient is, you know, being genuine, authentic, being grounded in your own values, right? And the growth mindset, like YVONNE said, because before the pandemic, I was always the person everyone came to with questions. Wendy has all the answers. Wendy's going to make everything right. But I was struggling. And I think, you know, for me personally, it's like, you know, who people perceive you to be, who you really are, and who you perceive yourself to be. So when a crisis or a pandemic hits, those three identities are in crisis. And for me, I really had to come to terms with, okay, I'm not okay with this, and really being okay to verbalize that and reach out for help, right? Because before the pandemic, that wasn't me. I was the person who was always offering that help, but really being true to myself and really understanding what I needed, and to have that growth mindset to reach out, right? And say, I need help. I need something else. This isn't something I usually do, but this is what I need. So really being true to yourself and being open to receiving help, despite what it may look like externally. And I think many times people run into trouble because we're worried about what the society or what our family or friends are going to think about us. So it prevents us from really realigning with our true self. So that's something personal that I experience. And, you know, I'm not sure how many other people can relate to that, but it's something I really had to come to terms with. And even now who I am, people are like, who are you? I'm like, I'm Wendy. I'm true to myself. I know when I need help and I'm okay with verbalizing that. I can be emotional just because you see me as this tough person. I'm human. I have emotions. I get stressed out, even though I am the stress resistance strategist, but I'm open to utilizing different strategies to help me through that.
Yeah, Wendy, that's so important. And I was thinking about too, Britt, from your kind of the sports analogy, from the Human Performance Institute, they look at people at work because, we're not out on the field doing battle. We're at work using our brain, a lot of times. And so the corporate athlete, if you think about it, we don't take a break. Like when you were training, you were training and then you recovered. You were training and you recovered. You didn't just play the big game 24 hours a day. But the corporate athlete is just feeling like, again, we talked about that endurance. I can muscle through this. I can be strong, because we celebrate that. And so I think a characteristic of someone who's resilient is someone who does recognize that for me to be at peak performance, I need to factor in some recovery time, but we don't, because like Wendy said, we don't give ourselves permission to, and I think that's what gets us in trouble.
That's a great comment, Yvonne, and I definitely love the analogy that in the business world, a lot of times we expect performance to improve 24/7 and we don't allow recovery time. We don't allow time for things outside of the business task, and we have a complete complex life, so we cannot expect everybody to be just devoted to their job and ignore what's happening with their life, what's happening with them as a parent and the parenting challenges, or the challenges whether with a pandemic or some other illness with a parent that they have to take care of. And businesses will have to recognize that to make people resilient and to allow people to be resilient, they have to embrace the whole individual. We cannot just focus on one task and one task only. We are not even talking about work-life balance, but we have to understand that it's a whole person that you have to work with, not just the person who comes to work 9 to 5, especially now that we're all working or mostly still working from home. So I think that's a very important consideration. One other aspect that I wanted to mention about resilient people is they see the problem as temporary. Although we've been going through challenges now for 2 years plus, people who are resilient don't see the permanence. They see that things are changing and things will improve. They also they're not overly positive and optimistic. There is a level of hope and optimism that resilient people need, but we cannot ignore and delete the negative emotions that we're experiencing or hide from them. We have to embrace the negative together with the positive hope that things will improve. And optimism is helpful, but only if it is a realistic optimism and we are not hiding from the challenges and the difficulties and the negative emotions that we're feeling. And I think that's very important for resilient people. So how do we build resilience in ourselves? How we know that through the growth mindset, resilience could be learned, but how could we help people, especially our audience here, how do we help them build more resilience and recognize their own resilience? What's your advice?
So I would say, being comfortable with self, being real with self. I think about it in a sense of control, regulation of your emotions, understanding your triggers, understanding how to alleviate those triggers, Also, communication is big in resilience, because if it's something you're not familiar with, being comfortable to reach out for help or assistance, or, you know, surround yourself with a community that will support you. But, you know, it really is being in tune with self. What do you need? That's what it really comes down to. What do you need, and what's going to be the next best step for you to really fulfill that need in terms of resilience? So that's my take on it. And we could talk about like emotional intelligence, being aware of your emotions, being aware of the emotions of others around you, but also how that's impacting you, right? Because things are going to happen in the world, but it's all about how you perceive them. So I think about like external stressors, things are happening all the time, but how are you perceiving those? How are you letting them impact you? So really that pause is really important when, you know, addressing that. But really it comes down to being in tune with self, and what do you need, and how do you really honor that?
Thank you, Wendy. And that's a great comment, because a lot of times in seminars like this, or when we read a book, sometimes we expect a recipe, something that will help everyone the same way. And it's important to recognize that we could all build resilience, but it will be in different ways. And it's important to know, what do you need? What are the resources that you have, whether they're inner strengths or outer resources and supports, but also what else do you need? Because it may be very personal. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. So I like that thought process of like, you know, as you're going through something, be very self-aware. And my brain actually went to a time where I felt like I wasn't taking any risks and I wasn't flexing that muscle, because I think resilience is a muscle, right? It's something that you have to go through something to then prove to yourself that you are resilient, so that you can take a pause. And so I think back to a time when I was, and this may just be the former athlete in me, I don't know, but I remember being in New York, and I'd been a teacher for 2.5, 3 years. And by your third year, you know what you're doing. You know, it's not that it's not challenging, it's just, you know what you're doing now. I had been in New York for maybe like 5 years now. So I was used to New York, and I was thinking, man, nothing's hard right now. And so then I signed up to run the marathon. I was like, I'm going to run the marathon this year because I need a challenge. And it's something that I don't know if it was always like that and it lived in me, but I was so excited to take this risk because I knew that I could quit, and that would be a challenge in itself, right? I'd have to push through that. I could also get hurt. I already have a bad knee, so I'd have to work through that. I could, you know, my schedule with school could start to conflict with having to train, and that could become a problem. But I wanted that challenge. I wanted to say like, okay, I'm juggling things again. And so I would say, outside of just recognizing, you know, you're being aware of yourself, I would say also take some risks. Go out and do something that's going to build resilience, because it is a muscle. Sometimes we forget that we are resilient until we go through something again. So it could be as small as a diet for 30 days, you know, as far as, you know, going abroad and taking a new role, but definitely take a risk and build and flex that muscle.
Yeah. And, you know, building that muscle, like you said, it's just going to happen, you know, by itself, right? So we have to be intentional about it. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of stumble, because you have to build in some new practices. And that's hard to do. We know it's sometimes hard to break some old habits. So once you identify, and like we said, if you don't factor in that recovery time, it's going to be imposed on you, kind of not in a good way, you know, where people just have a breakdown or suffer, you know, some kind of physical, you know, or mental issue. And so, you know, we have so many demands on us, and a lot of people think, I just don't have time. I don't have time. And so this being resilient isn't about, you know, managing your time better, but it's managing the energy that you expend. And you have, you know, different sources of energy, the spiritual energy, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And it's up to you to determine how much of the energy, you know, that I'm expending, and am I building in some recovery for that? That's really the key that, you know, I see with folks is they take care of everybody else and they're last on the list and they have nothing left, you know, in the tank.
And that's very important. Self-care and self-compassion are very important. And I would just add, related to both Britt and Yvonne's comments, that sometimes we expect too much of ourselves. And while we are practicing, while we're flexing that muscle, we have to recognize the small wins, because we have sometimes unrealistic expectations, and if we don't reach them, we don't recognize the huge progress we've made, and we may need to pause and then continue. But in that pause, if we recognize what we've achieved, if we've recognized at least the progress that we've made in the process, maybe you signed up for a marathon and you decided at the end that you are not competing in this marathon, but you've improved in other ways in the process of practicing and training. And the ability to say no, or to pause, and to quit sometimes, and to accept that that's part of life, and to go in a different direction is also very important. But in the process, don't forget to, and I believe resilient people see what's in their control and recognize that the small progress that they've made. And sometimes when things are challenging and there is a lot of uncertainty, we have to focus on the small steps that we could make, instead of just look at an unrealistic goal and don't even attempt to reach it. I think that's also very important.
Can I say one thing regarding
absolutely.
this topic? So there's something that a way, like a systematic way to think about this, and I would love to just have a moment to share with the audience.
Yeah.
So it's really shape is what it's called, but what is the story around the stressor or issue in your life? So really taking the pause to write this down. And then the H is for hone. What is your purpose, or what is your goal, and how is this stressor impacting you from achieving or working towards this goal? The A is for assessment. Really, what do you have in your toolbox, or what do you need to add to your toolbox? The what or the who, right? Because you may need to reach out to someone. We talked about community. The P is the plan. How do you operationalize what you identified? The who or the what. So that could be your SMART plan: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timed. And the E is really execute. So what is your next step to really take a step to executing that plan? So that's one way you can really think about it. And I think the important part about the A is that we really possess a lot, but we just don't take the time to really explore what we have to move ourselves forward. So again, the power of that pause, of just applying that framework, can be so powerful to move you to where you want to be.
Thank you, Wendy. And I hope that we could share with the audience a reference to that visualization so they could refer to it, because it's very powerful to be able to connect all the steps and visualize them as well. Thank you. So I think it's important to think about how to build and recognize the resilience in ourselves. And I am glad that Britt talked about how she recognized the resilience that she already possessed from previous experiences. But it's also important to talk about building and recognizing resilience in others, whether they're others in the workplace, others in your family, your children. How do we help people to be more resilient, to feel more resilient? So what's your advice to the audience?
Yeah, I remember when I was teaching, you know, that's all you're doing. You are building resilience in your students, especially if you are in a city like New York or Philly or Baltimore, where it's heavily standardized tested. You know, that's the bread and butter to keep schools open. And I worked in a charter school, and that was, unfortunately, our measuring stick was how many of your kids are going to pass this test. And it was stressful. It was stressful for me. It was stressful for them. It was stressful for their parents, but also it was eating at their confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was eating at their ability to be resilient. And, you know, my kids played soccer. My kids were in art and they weren't seeing that connection. And so I loved working with my students and saying, hey man, I went to that dance competition you had on Saturday and you know, you stumbled, you fell, but you got right back into it. How did you do that? You know, and letting my kids stop and think about other times where they fell. You know, and it seems so simple. And I know there's like songs and there's movies and there's books about it, but when you talk to a child and let them see that connection, you know, it's really powerful, because then they overcome that hump and then they remember that. And then they become coaches to other students. And I loved doing that. I loved doing that with them and then saying, come up and share your story. Talk to us about how you struggled. And kids they love to share, they love to tell a story. So I think anytime you can work with some children, help them see the connection and then let them become the teacher, man, that is extremely powerful. So that is something I definitely did all the time when I worked with my students.
Thank you. And that's a perfect example of how we could create these controlled environments where kids or even adults need to experience adversity, experience the challenge, but also have the support to work through it and learn that they could overcome adversity, because that's the best teacher. Thank you, Britt.
Yeah, Britt, I loved that reframe about, you know, when you have challenges and things don't, you know, go the way that you want, because that does build that resilience muscle. And, you know, the work that I do at PwC, of course, I'm seeing kind of a different population, and what I would see there of how they can help, you know, develop or recognize and develop resilience in others is just being a good role model, you know, practicing mindfulness, noticing, and really asking people, you know, how are you feeling? And don't just be okay with them saying, I'm fine, right? But just stay with it, because people say I'm fine when they're not fine. And, you know, normalizing that this is difficult. So if they share, hey, I'm struggling and, you know, here's what I'm trying to do about it, that is a way to help to build it in others, you know, by just, I think, noticing, asking good questions, being fully present with others is, because when you're fully present, I think the benefit is you slow down, you pause, you feel better. They said people feel better when they help others. So it is, you know, kind of a win-win. And just spreading the word, you know, about the importance of taking a break for your recovery.
Thank you, Yvonne. And yes, being a role model and an example of how everybody struggles. So it's normal to struggle, and asking for help is a great way to help others.
Oh, I was just going to say, normalizing the conversation, like Yvonne said. I think, you know, even in terms of stress, we don't talk to kids about stress, but talking to them about it openly, normalizing that conversation among colleagues, and like Yvonne said, listening. So someone say they're okay where you know they're not okay, but really listening and being present. But I think in terms of stress, we kind of poo-poo it or normalize having or being stressed, but not normalizing really talking about it and coming to solutions to really manage it.
And recognizing their small achievements or the progress that they're making, and not forgetting about them, because sometimes when we're faced with a future challenge, we just forget to pause and recognize our progress and achievements. I think that's very important. And creating a community of support. The community is always as important as the person and their own characteristic. Having an accepting and an available group of people who support you gives people strength to take risks and to accept the challenges that they're facing, because they know that they have the support of the people around you, and just showing people that you're there around them is important. So thank you, everyone. I hope the audience took some insights from our discussion that will help them reflect and first recognize their own resilience, and also help other people become more resilient. I would recommend, there are lots of books and other materials that you could explore. I love Wendy's shape visualization. If anybody else from the panelists wants to share any other materials as additional information to the audience, you're welcome to share them now.
Well, the work by Richard Leider, Leider, he has done a lot of work around, purpose. And so I think if anyone's interested in that, there are some books that he's written.
Thank you.
That are helpful.
And while we wait,
Yeah, I think.
oh, go ahead, Britt. I was just going to jump in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's funny, I don't really read nonfiction self-help books. I find that I get a lot of my inspiration about how to be or how to think about things are from memoirs. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, almost any memoir you pick up, you can learn a lot from. But I think the most recent book that I read that was just kind of made me sit down and think, wow, was The Warmth of Other Suns. And it's not a memoir. It's actually about the Great Migration from the South to the West and the East of Black people in the 60s. And it was a hard read, but man, was it inspiring. And I think, any book that you can read about a group of people making a huge change like that, when there's so many things against them, it's how I build my own resilience. So any memoir, but also that book is The Warmth of Other Suns.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
Oh, no, that's fine. I put the article link
Yes,
in the chat, but also my favorite book that really gives me perspective and I read it is Tuesdays with Morrie. I've been reading it for many years by Mitch Albom. That book just really sets my perspective in a totally different way. But if you haven't read it, or if you have read it, read it again. It's such a book that really just sets the tone. Love that book.
Thank you. And also as a book that shows how we have to adapt and find an alternative sometimes, I recommend Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. It's about what happens when you face adversity and you have to find a different way, an alternative way to approach your goals and what you want to achieve in life. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to all of you for your insight and your suggestions and strategies and framing of the conversation. I think, as we do these over the course of time, we often find those nuggets of information that are so crucial that we overlook so easily, right? And I think we talked about that from self-care to understanding what the power of having a conversation with others and stopping and taking that moment with them truly can do for you. And I think all of you spoke to that very eloquently in terms of just, we need to stop and prime the fire, right? We need to make sure that we're ready to go and understand that our own internal machinations are really taken care of first and foremost before we can do what we need to do to be successful anywhere else. While we allow folks to kind of digest and before we wrap up, we do have a few questions that have come forward. So if we can jump in there, but if anybody out there has any final thoughts or comments or questions, this is definitely the time to drop those into the Q&A now. So if you'll bear with me for 1 second, let me pull that back up here. The first one that I have here is in terms of when work doesn't seem to honor your time or your ability to recharge, or using that corporate athlete concept that YVONNE, you were talking about earlier, how they don't allow you to necessarily recharge or heal in the way that you need to. What are some strategies that this group might recommend to try and communicate that with those that need to hear it so that they can accomplish it?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is a courageous conversation. Because many times wherever you work, institutions don't find that as important, but you know it's important. So having a courageous conversation with who you need to have it with, but also coming with the solution. So are you able to be that change agent to develop a program or initiative that will help people take a pause or provide your colleagues with what they need? I think it's important to voice that. And many times we don't like to disrupt how things are going, but courageous conversations are so important in this day and age, especially since we're so disrupted and so many things have shifted. But I think that's the first thing. And then if that conversation does not go and it's not honored and you know that's a need, then you have to go back into yourself and realign. Is this where I need to be, or do I need to shift, right? So that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah, and also, you know, the recovery time doesn't have to be hours. Sometimes it can be 3 minutes, right? Of just switching activity, sending a text to someone that you love. You know, it just is kind of taking that break and doing some different activity.
Yeah, I 100% agree with both. I think there is, like, you know, making sure you're actually in the right place to even have those conversations. Everybody's not fortunate to be working in places like that. But I think the other half is definitely thinking about how you're spending your time outside of work, right? Like, I've definitely had to do that. If there's long stretches or long projects that I know I'm on and I'm like, okay, I'm working with international folks, for the next 3 months, my schedule is shot. So I have to be intentional about what I'm doing before I go to bed. You know, maybe I'm not watching Netflix anymore. I'm reading a book before I go to bed. Maybe I am doing stretches in the morning, doing yoga. You know, I don't want to get up at 6:30, but man, do I feel better. So I think it's about reframing also how you're spending your time outside of work when it seems like you can't really change work.
I just want to mention that you have to, whether it's a courageous conversation or you're doing something for yourself, it's important for you and for the people across the table from you to present it in a way that they understand that it's not only you, it's not selfish, it's for them, it's to keep you productive longer, to keep you more efficient longer. So sometimes people forget that these breaks are necessary, right? Like the recovery, and you have to, in the conversation, explain how it is better for them as well as for you. And then they will accept and agree easily. But if they don't see it, if they see it as a selfish act, then they get defensive and they don't want to allow it. So think from the perspective of the other person. Why would they be happy for you to take a break and to pause?
Oh, thank you all so much for that insight. And this next question, this person's reading my mind as to where I was thinking the next question could come from. But in terms of assessing whether it's the organization you currently work for, or say that you're searching for that next opportunity, what are some of the questions that you should be asking of the organization to assess their resiliency culture and whether or not it's the right fit for you, whether that's current or in your search?
I think one is just understanding what are those core values of, you know, the firm or the organization. I would talk to people that work there, you know, and just kind of get a sense for, you know, do they focus on some wellness? Do they prioritize wellness? I'm seeing more and more organizations that are fighting for talent, you know, having to just, whether it's the right thing to do or whether they need to just, you know, be more attractive to people. I find that more and more organizations are, you know, kind of focusing on the wellness. It still does, you know, it's still up to each individual though to make it a priority.
Yeah, some questions that I've asked, especially when I was coming to Microsoft, because Microsoft kept saying, you know, they're a great place to work and growth mindset, Sachi has come, and et cetera, and they were right. But before I got here, I remember asking, you know, going through their core values and saying, okay, can you give me a real life example of this core value that you've seen in the workplace? And I would just go down the list with different people, and depending on their responses, like, is that a real response or that was like a fluff response? how comfortable people are talking about that is also very telling, right? And then another question I'd love to ask is, tell me about one thing that needs to change here. And I felt like more often than not, if there was a culture shift that needed to happen, it came out right away. People have no problem telling you what needs to change. Some people would say, we have too many meetings right off the bat, didn't even hesitate. And it's like, okay, well, that's a thing that happens sometimes. But if it's like a culture thing, I feel like it will come out when you ask some pointed questions about what needs to change about this company, and give me an example of this core value in real time. From your personal experience, and put it back on them, and it typically comes out.
Yeah, I agree with both of those responses. One thing I will add is just being aware of your values, right? Because sometimes we just, what is their mission and all that, you can ask about that. But sometimes in your gut, it's like, this does not align with me, and really listen to that, but assess your values and what you're looking for and see if it really aligns with that organization.
Thank you. I would also add, give them a scenario that's a challenging scenario, and ask, how would they react if they were in your shoes, or how would they proceed if they have a similar problem? And their reaction or response usually indicates a lot about what's accepted and what's not.
That's fantastic. And thank you all. And Britt, I like your comment there about asking those questions. I mean, like you said, the one that always gets me on the job description is fast paced. That's the one that I always question. I have to ask follow-up questions as to what that means, because to the conversation we've had, sometimes fast paced means you work a little bit too much. So no, all good things in that. So appreciate that. I think that's all the time we have for today. So I want to thank first and foremost our panelists for joining us today, and our moderator, Professor MADJAR. Thank you so much to all four of you for joining us today. It's been fantastic hearing your insight. You all are a wealth of information, and I hope we can all tap into all of your expertise at a later time as well. This has been fantastic. And to all of you for joining us from the comfort of your home or your office or wherever it might be, thank you so much for continuing to stick with us. We look to bring more information for you, more programs like this to you in a little bit. If you have suggestions, you'll get a survey from us. Please feel free to throw those in there if there's other topics you'd like to see. But in the meantime, enjoy the warm weather here in New England, as it's supposed to be this weekend. If you're elsewhere, definitely get some time to jump outside and take that time for you. And we'll definitely see you with another program shortly. And again, huge thanks to our panelists, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.